I was 65 when my husband left me, not for a younger woman, not because I'd done anything wrong, but for someone who had stood beside me at our wedding, my best friend of 42 years. Her name was Evelyn. She was the one who held my veil when I said, I do. The one who brought me soup after my hysterectomy. The one who once cried when I miscarried, saying, we've lost something precious. And then, one Monday morning, I found her toothbrush in my bathroom. Not because she was staying the night, but because she'd moved in while I was still there. Richard stood at the bottom of the stairs, his arms crossed, saying, we didn't want to hurt you, Claire, but you've been so distant lately. And you're strong. You'll be fine. As if that made betrayal better. Evelyn didn't meet my eyes. She just said, it's time we live for ourselves. And then she offered me herbal tea. Like that would wash the taste of 40 years out of my mouth. I didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't demand the house or the car, or even an apology. I simply packed 2 suitcases and walked out the front door. No questions, no tears. They thought I was broken. But what they didn't know was that I had already learned how to survive the things people don't say out loud, that I'd been preparing for the day someone took everything, and I'd made sure I had something no one could take. A quiet little account in a quiet little place. Started 18 years ago when Richard took a second mortgage without telling me. I never said a word, just started stashing. A little every month, then a little more when Evelyn asked for a loan she never paid back. They thought they were clever, but I was patient, and patience, paired with memory, is power. The betrayal didn't come in a slap, it came in a toothbrush. I was making coffee, black, 2 sugars. When I opened the bathroom cabinet for aspirin, that's when I saw it. 2 toothbrushes, not mine and Richard's, but mine and Evelyn's. Her brush was pink, same brand she always used on her trips, same one she brought when we went to Santa Fe together, when she joked that if we were widows, we'd just move in together and grow old in peace. Back then, I laughed. Now I just stood there, my fingers tightening around the bottle cap. I didn't say anything that morning. I finished making coffee, set the mugs down. Richard didn't even look up from his phone. Evelyn sat where I used to sit, left side of the table near the window, my chair. She wore my robe. That one stuck with me the most. The grey one with the frayed sleeve that Richard always said made me look cosy. She was wearing it like it had always been hers. I excused myself, walked upstairs, and opened my closet. Half empty. Some of my dresses were missing. I opened the drawers. Her perfume sat next to my night cream. She wasn't visiting. She had moved in. The silence in the house was loud now, like it had been waiting to be noticed. I sat down on the edge of the bed and thought about that weekend trip 3 months ago when Evelyn said she needed to get away and Richard offered to stay behind to handle some house repairs. I thought I was lucky to have a husband I trusted and a friend who needed me. I thought I was safe. That's what hurt the most. Not the toothbrush, not the robe, not the missing dresses, but that I hadn't seen it coming. Or maybe I had, and chose not to. I stood up and picked up my phone, not to call anyone, but to start photographing everything I had paid for in that house, just in case. The scent hit me before the memory did. Chanel No. 5, always Evelyn's signature. I stared at the bottle sitting on my dresser, its glass edges catching the afternoon light. It didn't belong here, not just because it wasn't mine, but because it had once been a guest in my life. Now it was claiming space. I closed my eyes and the years peeled back like wallpaper. It was 13 years ago. Evelyn had just gone through her second divorce. She arrived at my doorstep at 9:30 p.m, mascara streaked, suitcase in hand, trying to smile but failing. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she'd said. And of course, I took her in. Of course, I made tea. Of course, I told Richard she could stay as long as she needed. She lived with us for 4 months, cooked dinner twice a week, taught me how to make lemon risotto, laughed at Richard's bad jokes when even I couldn't fake it. One night, we were folding laundry together in the guest room. She held up one of my cardigans, soft beige, the one Richard liked. "This is nice," she said, rubbing the fabric between her fingers. "I bet he loves you in this." It was an odd comment. Not cruel, not flirtatious, just loaded. Later that week, she asked how our finances worked, whether Richard handled everything, or if we had joint accounts. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? I told myself. She was my best friend. She cried with me when we put our dog down. She made scrapbooks of our family vacations, sometimes better than I did. I remembered the way she used to say, "You're so lucky, Claire. You have stability. It's so rare." I thought it was admiration. Maybe it was inventory. Back in the bedroom, the scent of Chanel No. 5 lingered. I opened the drawer again, pushed the perfume aside, and found a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years. But Evelyn had always complimented. They weren't hers. But something in me didn't feel like they were mine anymore either. The past had fingerprints I hadn't seen until now. I closed the drawer slowly, and the silence returned. Claire didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't pack in a flurry of rage. She cleaned, wiped down the kitchen counters that still had crumbs from Evelyn's breakfast scone, dusted the picture frames, especially the one by the stairwell of her and Richard in Prague 25 years ago. She took it off the wall, not out of anger, just finishedness. Richard came home that afternoon with Evelyn. They talked about some wine-tasting event. Claire stood in the kitchen, polishing silverware, saying nothing. "You're quiet today," Richard said. Claire smiled faintly, just clearing a few things. Evelyn shifted. Her eyes didn't meet Claire's. Claire noticed that. She noticed everything now. That Evelyn had started folding the laundry the way Claire always did. That her makeup kit sat in the exact spot Claire's used to. That her laugh had taken on Claire's rhythm, deliberate, low-pitched, warm. Claire wondered how long Evelyn had been rehearsing her part. That night, Claire sat at her desk. She pulled out the manila folder from the bottom drawer, the one marked Copies. Inside were the deed to the beach house, the original title for the Mercedes, the binder of receipts she'd kept, every remodel, every check she'd written, every item she bought in this house. Claire began snapping photos, one by one. She wasn't trying to build a case. She was building clarity, not for them, for her. Later, she opened the drawer where Evelyn had stuffed her scarves. Claire didn't touch them. She placed a post-it on the inside wall of the drawer. Memory, do not disturb. When she came downstairs, Richard was asleep on the recliner. Evelyn was scrolling on her phone. Claire sat across from her and said nothing. Evelyn glanced up, the briefest flicker of guilt, or maybe confusion, in her eyes. Claire simply nodded, not out of forgiveness, not out of defeat, but out of detachment. She stood, walked to the office, wrote her name neatly on a blank envelope, and slipped the photos inside. Tomorrow, she would leave. But not because they pushed her out, because she no longer fit inside the world they were pretending wasn't borrowed. The bus rattled along the coastline, windows fogged from the morning chill. Claire sat near the back, her coat folded neatly in her lap, a canvas bag by her feet. Inside it, a thermos, a folder, and a worn leather notebook with initials she hadn't looked at in years. She hadn't been back to the beach house in over a decade, not because she didn't love it, but because it had become hers, fully, quietly, without need for show. She watched the tide roll in through the streaked window, white froth curling at the edges like breath exhaled, and her mind went back to 2005, the year Richard refinanced the house behind her back, the year Evelyn asked for $8,000 just until her settlement came through, the year Claire realised no one was protecting her but herself. So she began keeping records, at first just in a small green ledger, debits, credits, dates. Then, when her former co-worker, Miriam, an ex-auditor, offered to help her open a discreet offshore account just in case, Claire didn't say no. She deposited $300 a month, then $500, then more, as Richard's business expenses increased and Evelyn's emergencies became annual. She never told anyone, not out of fear, but because saying it out loud would invite the wrong kind of attention. Silence was safety. Now, 18 years later, that silence was interest-bearing. The bus pulled into a gravel lot beside a general store. The house was just 3 blocks down, still partially obscured by the row of cedar trees she'd insisted they plant in '92. Claire stepped off the bus slowly, stretching her back, feeling the air shift. It smelled like salt and memory. The key was still hidden behind the porch lamp, where only she knew to reach. When the door creaked open, dust greeted her like an old friend, not intrusive, just present. She didn't light every room, just the kitchen. Pulled out the folder, opened the notebook, flipped to the most recent line item, interest accrued as of last quarter, substantial. She ran her fingers over the ink, not out of greed, but out of affirmation, that she had always known the storm would come, and now she was not afraid of its wind. Claire picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. A voice answered in French-accented English. "Yes, Madam Blackwood. What would you like to do with the account today?" Claire smiled softly. "Nothing drastic. Just let's start moving some of it closer to home." The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, its steam rising like a ribbon into the skylight. Claire moved slowly, her motions deliberate. She poured the water into her mug, chamomile, no sugar, and took it to the small table by the window overlooking the dunes. The beach house hadn't changed much, neither had she, not really. She sat in silence, letting the heat of the mug bleed into her palms. Then her phone buzzed. Miriam. Claire hesitated. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Not out of distance, just divergence. Life had drifted them apart, gently. She answered. "I heard," Miriam said softly. Claire didn't ask how. Miriam always heard things, like smoke detecting fire before the first flame. "Are you all right?" she asked. Claire sipped her tea. "I'm where I need to be." There was a pause, long but not awkward. "Do they know?" Miriam asked. Claire gave a quiet laugh. "Know what?" "That you remember every check you ever wrote, every deposit, every time he told you it was just a business expense." Claire looked out at the ocean. The waves moved steadily, without apology. "They never thought I was paying attention." "Because you weren't loud about it," Miriam said. "I didn't need to be," Claire replied. "I just needed to be exact." Miriam hummed. "Do you still keep the green ledger?" Claire smiled. "It's in the bag beside me." "Of course it is," Miriam said, warmth tucked behind her teasing. "They think I left with nothing," Claire said after a moment. "Then you did it right," Miriam replied. "They'll never ask what you kept, only what you took." Claire sat with that for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you think I waited too long?" Miriam didn't answer immediately. "You waited long enough to know the difference between reaction and power." Claire closed her eyes. "You never forgot your own bottom line." The next morning, Miriam arrived. She didn't call. She didn't ask. She just showed up with scones and a paper bag that smelled like roasted almonds. Claire opened the door without surprise. "You always hated voicemail," she said with a small smile. "And you always hid your anger in neat handwriting," Miriam replied, holding up a manila folder. It was the same folder Claire had mailed to herself 6 years ago, unopened, sealed, time-stamped. Legal protection without confrontation. They sat in the kitchen, sunlight creeping across the table like it, too, was eavesdropping. "Why now?" Claire asked. "Because you'll stall," Miriam said. "You'll tell yourself you don't need to prove anything, and that's true. But this isn't about proof, it's about position." Claire opened the folder. Inside, photocopies, receipts, bank letters, a notarized statement from 2017, a quiet map of a woman who had never forgotten what it meant to document her own value. "You kept every page," Claire said softly. Miriam nodded. "Even when you didn't believe you'd need them." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't want revenge." "This isn't revenge. It's recall." Claire traced her fingers over a line that read, "Secondary title holder, Claire Ann Blackwood." She exhaled. "If I waited for someone to rescue me, I'd still be packing his socks." Miriam leaned forward, her voice low. "Then stop waiting! Move it!" Claire looked out the window where the dunes shimmered faintly in the morning haze. She stood, walked to the cabinet above the fridge, and pulled down a small grey lockbox. "What's in there?" Miriam asked. Claire smiled. "Receipts. The paper kind, and the emotional ones." "Perfect," Miriam said. "That's all you need." Claire didn't slam the door. She didn't even close it loudly. She left it slightly ajar, as if to say, "This was always yours to ruin. I'm just stepping out of the rubble." It was early. Barely 6:30 a.m. The house still smelled faintly of the candles Evelyn had lit the night before, vanilla and cinnamon, trying too hard to make chaos smell like comfort. Claire walked room to room, not packing, just scanning, taking a mental inventory of what once was hers, but no longer needed to be. The wedding photo in the hallway, she slid it from its frame and left only the mat. In the kitchen, she folded a linen napkin and placed it on the table with a note atop it, written in her hand. "Don't forget who built this." Simple, not angry, just true. Her car was already loaded. 2 suitcases, 1 file box, and the lockbox. No jewellery, no heirlooms, no shared memories that would sour with time. As she stepped into the entryway, Richard appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing the old robe Claire once gave him. He looked startled, not guilty, just caught off guard. "You're leaving now?" he asked, voice still groggy. Claire didn't look up at him. "It's quieter this way." Evelyn's voice floated from the hallway behind him. "Claire, wait. Maybe we should—" Claire cut in gently. "Don't finish that sentence. It'll echo for years if you do." Neither of them moved. Claire picked up her keys, opened the door fully, and stepped into the morning. The sun wasn't bright yet, but the light was enough. Enough to see the path, enough to feel the weight lift from her shoulders. As she walked to the car, she didn't look back, but if she had, she might have seen Richard reading the note, and Evelyn, folding the napkin again, as if trying to undo the meaning behind it. The chair on the deck creaked as Claire leaned back, her cup of tea half full and cooling in her hands. The ocean murmured below, steady and indifferent. It reminded her of numbers, constant, quiet, always adding up, even when you weren't paying attention. Just like debt. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to 2008, the year the economy slipped, and so did Richard's construction firm. Claire remembered the call she'd picked up while folding towels. "This is First Equity. We're following up on the 90-day delinquency on your business credit line." She'd paused. "I think you have the wrong number." But they didn't. When she confronted Richard, he brushed it off. "Just a delay with invoices. We're waiting on payment from a big client." She wanted to believe him, but the numbers didn't lie. She checked the business accounts while he slept, called their accountant, cross-referenced loan documents, and then she saw it, the second mortgage, the silent withdrawal from their joint CD, the overdraft notices she never got because they were sent to a P.O. box. Claire didn't scream. She opened her green ledger, moved $12,000 from her offshore account, paid off the critical balance, told Richard she'd found a savings stash they'd forgotten about. He never asked for details. He never thanked her either. The company survived. They even took a vacation the next summer. Cancun. Evelyn came too. Claire remembered Evelyn snapping a photo of her and Richard by the shore, saying, "Still standing after all these years. What's your secret?" Claire had smiled. But inside she thought, spreadsheets and silence. Now, in the present, she reached for that same green ledger. Flipped to the page marked 2008. There it was, $12,000 withdrawn, memo. Balance repair. No one had ever seen that line but her. Not Richard, not Evelyn, not even Miriam. Claire let out a slow breath. She had been the one patching leaks while they decorated the house above her. And now she was done waterproofing their ship. The clink of silverware echoed louder than it should have in the kitchen. Evelyn stirred her coffee, eyes flicking to the empty seat across the table, Claire's old spot. Richard sat across from her, scrolling his phone, barely chewing his toast. It was the first morning Claire was gone, really gone. No silent footsteps down the hall, no scent of citrus detergent, no mugs perfectly lined up by the sink, just space. "It feels strange," Evelyn said, trying to sound light, "like something's missing." Richard didn't look up. "She's gone. That's what you wanted." Evelyn winced, then smiled too quickly. "I didn't want—" She paused. "I just thought things would feel freer." He raised an eyebrow. "You think she just walked away?" Evelyn blinked. "Didn't she?" Richard put down his phone. "Claire doesn't just do anything. She calculates. She prepares. You know that." Evelyn bit her lip. She looked down at her plate. Eggs untouched. "You don't think she's going to make trouble, do you?" Richard shrugged. "What trouble?" She didn't take anything. Evelyn leaned forward, voice low. "Exactly. She didn't take anything. Not even her name off the deed." Richard looked away. That pause, that breath too long between sentences. It was nothing, but it was everything. Evelyn caught it. "You said she wouldn't fight, that she was done." "She is," Richard said flatly. But even he didn't believe it now, because Claire didn't leave like someone defeated. She left like someone finished. And somehow, that was worse. Evelyn reached for her mug, but her hand shook slightly, the spoon clinking louder than before. The kitchen, once warm with cinnamon candles and faux intimacy, now felt staged, as if the props were in place, but the story had lost its script. She looked out the window. The garden hadn't been tended in weeks. The rosemary bush was wilting. "Maybe I'll take up gardening," she said aloud, forcing a smile. Richard didn't respond. He was staring at the linen napkin Claire had folded before she left, still resting in the fruit bowl, untouched, unmoved. Richard typed in the password again, slower this time. Invalid. He adjusted his glasses, checked the caps lock, tried again. Still invalid. The online dashboard for their investment account had always been finicky, but this was different. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Bayview Capital, this is Karen. How may I assist you?" "This is Richard Blackwood. I'm trying to access my joint portfolio, account ending in 9377. One moment, Mr. Blackwood. Click, hold music, then silence. A new voice came on, male, crisp. Mr. Blackwood, thank you for your patience. I see the account. Unfortunately, you're not currently listed as an authorized account holder. Richard blinked. I've been on that account for over 20 years. That may have been true, but as of June 2017, the secondary holder designation was removed. Removed? By whom? By the primary, Claire Ann Blackwood, with full documentation and notarized confirmation. He sat back, the room tilting slightly. But we filed taxes jointly. We used it for the renovation. That account holds a significant balance. Yes, the rep interrupted gently. But only the listed account holder can authorize movement. I'm her husband, ex-husband, according to our updated beneficiary record, and I see there was a legal address change filed 2 months ago. Richard stared at the computer screen. His name was nowhere. Just Claire's, her email, her contact number. He ended the call without saying goodbye. Downstairs, Evelyn was reading on the couch. You look pale, she said. We don't have access to the investment fund, Richard said flatly. Evelyn laughed. You mean the online login's not working? I was never on it. Not for the last 6 years. Evelyn sat up. What do you mean she removed you? You can't just do that. Apparently you can, if it's in your name. He didn't say more. Didn't mention the part about the updated beneficiaries, or the new mailing address in another state. He stood there, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, not in confusion anymore, in realization. Claire had started walking away long before she ever reached the door. The call came just after sunset. Claire was on the porch, blanket over her knees, watching the last gold slip off the water. She didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. Claire, it's me. Evelyn's voice was softer than Claire had ever heard it, almost rehearsed. Claire didn't respond. I thought maybe we should talk, just once, without all the noise. There was never any noise, Evelyn, Claire said. Only silence you mistook for permission. A pause. I'm sorry if it hurt you, Evelyn said, her breath catching. But I was always on the outside. You had the house, the family, the stability. I had Thanksgiving invites from other people's families. Claire closed her eyes. So, you made mine yours. I didn't plan it that way, Evelyn whispered. But when I saw how he looked at me, like someone needed him, I couldn't stop. I wanted to feel central, just once. And you thought the best way to feel central was to steal the centre of someone else's life. Evelyn exhaled shakily. It wasn't like that. It always is, Claire replied. You wanted what I had, but you didn't want to know what it took to build it. Another pause. The kind that feels like someone's trying to reach a version of you that no longer exists. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Evelyn said. I wanted you to know it wasn't about hate. I admired you, Claire. I still do. Claire looked out at the ocean. Then you should have learned from me. Instead, you tried to replace me. The wind shifted. He's not handling things well, Evelyn said softly. He didn't know you'd withdrawn. He never asked, Claire said. And neither did you. Evelyn's voice cracked. I don't know how to fix this. Claire's tone didn't rise, but it didn't falter either. You had a choice. You chose a door I already closed. Evelyn didn't reply. Claire waited 3 more seconds, then ended the call. She placed the phone down, folded her blanket over her lap, and whispered, You don't get to feel like the victim in the story you broke. The next morning, Claire opened her inbox. There it was, a message from Richard. Subject, we need to talk. She didn't open it, didn't need to. The preview was enough. I didn't know about the account. You should have told me. Maybe we could have handled this differently. Underneath it, a second email from Evelyn. Subject: I wish we could rewind. Claire closed her laptop without clicking either. She stood, walked to the desk drawer, and pulled out the old scrapbook Evelyn had gifted her on her 50th birthday. Photos of vacations, quotes in calligraphy, pressed flowers. Claire removed the pressed rose from the back page and watched it crumble in her hand. She went to the kitchen, made herself toast, sliced half an avocado. Tea, mint, 2 drops of honey, the morning routine. Quiet, complete. The phone buzzed. Another text. Richard, we didn't mean to hurt you. She typed only 1 sentence in reply. It's time we live for ourselves. The same words Evelyn had spoken the day she moved in. Claire stared at the line, then hit send. A full beat passed. Then she blocked both numbers. She opened her laptop again, not to check email, but to update her emergency contact list. She replaced Richard's name with Miriam's, then opened the banking portal, initiated the next transfer. No rush, no threat, just motion. Outside, the tide had come in, swallowing the first set of footprints from her early morning walk. She took a sip of tea, then whispered, No one gets to rewrite my ending, but me. The scent of fresh paint clung to the air like a new promise. Claire stepped back, brush in hand, admiring the soft sage colour she'd chosen for the bedroom walls. Calm, grounded, nothing like the stark white Richard always insisted on for resale value. This room wasn't for resale, it was for staying. She opened the windows, letting the ocean breeze carry out the smell of old drywall and old memories. Then she unpacked the final box. Books, letters, a few keepsakes from her parents' estate. She held up a picture of her father in the garden, dirt under his nails, holding a tomato like a trophy. Claire smiled and placed it on the newly sanded shelf. On the kitchen table lay a small pile of clipped recipes. One of them was Richard's favourite, lemon rosemary chicken. She paused, considered, then folded the recipe and slipped it into the fire pit bin by the back door. Not out of anger, just making room. Later, she walked to the small nursery market down the road and bought 3 new pots, mint, basil and rosemary, not to cook for anyone, just for herself. When the clerk rang her up, he asked, New in town? Claire smiled faintly, in a way. That afternoon she called her financial advisor. Yes, I'd like to go ahead and begin consolidating the holdings, bring everything into my name. And no, there's no co-signer, hasn't been in years. She also made an appointment with a local estate planner. No kids, no dependents, but I'd like my assets to go somewhere meaningful, maybe a scholarship fund or a women's legal aid group. There was a pause on the line. Then the planner said, It's rare to hear such clarity. Claire answered, It took 40 years, but I finally know what I'm building for. That night, she sat on the porch again, same chair, same blanket, but this time she had her journal in her lap. She didn't write anything dramatic, just a sentence. Peace is not silence. It's choosing what to hear. The living room was dim, lit only by the last light filtering through the blinds. Richard sat on the floor in front of the bookshelf, something he hadn't done in years. The carpet still held the faint imprint of the coffee table Claire used to polish every Sunday. He opened the bottom drawer. Inside were scraps of old memories, birthday cards, trip brochures, a faded receipt from a hardware store. But what caught his eye was the matte backing of their wedding photo. The frame Claire had left empty. He turned it over. The photo was still there, tucked behind the mat like a secret. He pulled it out, held it. Claire in lace, squinting slightly from the sun. His arm around her, both of them laughing, Before the photographer even said anything, he sat like that for a long time, not speaking, not blinking. The TV was off, his phone untouched beside him. Evelyn walked in from the hallway, carrying 2 wine glasses. She stopped when she saw him. "What are you doing on the floor?" He didn't answer. She placed the glasses down quietly and sat on the couch. Silence. It used to feel warm when Claire was in the room. Now it just felt aware. Evelyn looked at the photo in his hands. She kept that. Richard finally spoke, low, almost absent. She took it out of the frame, left the space. "That's dramatic," Evelyn muttered, attempting a half smile. Richard didn't respond. He stood slowly, walked to the hallway, opened the drawer Claire used to keep loose tea bags and hand lotion in. He placed the photo inside. Not neatly, but not carelessly either. Just returned. Then he closed the drawer, not slammed, not locked, just closed. Evelyn watched him, unsure if she should say something. She didn't, because some silences were no longer safe to fill. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and sea salt through the open windows. Claire was in the study, organising files, her files this time, not labelled ours. The folders were clean, the dividers crisp. Miriam arrived with coffee and a small brown envelope. "I passed your old house this morning," she said, setting the drinks down. The porch light was on. No decorations, just still. Claire didn't look up right away. "He's not one for decorating," she said flatly. Miriam opened the envelope. Inside was the updated property transfer draft, listing Claire as the sole owner of the beach house, investment account, and the silent LLC holding their previous commercial lot. "He was sitting in the living room," Miriam added, "holding that wedding photo, the one with the sunlight flare. Looked like he hadn't moved in hours." Claire paused. She didn't ask why Miriam was telling her. She already knew. For a moment, she looked out the window. The rosemary she'd planted last week was sprouting new tips. Resilient, subtle. She picked up a pen. Considered writing something. A line. A sentence. Anything. Instead, she capped the pen and placed it down. "It's hard, you know," she finally said. "Not because I miss them, but because they still think it's about them." Miriam smiled faintly. "You were always the steady one. They just didn't know. Steadiness doesn't mean stagnation." Claire walked to the bookshelf and pulled out an old crystal vase, one they'd gotten as a wedding gift, never used. She wrapped it gently in brown paper and placed it in the box labelled "Donate." No ceremony, just closure. Her phone buzzed. Incoming call. Richard. She watched the screen. The phone vibrated twice, 3 times. She hit decline, then blocked the number. Again, just in case. She turned to Miriam. "Let's go finalise the trust documents." Miriam nodded. "You're sure?" "Absolutely. I'm not looking back. I'm looking where the sun rises now." The office was warm, with sunlight filtering through slatted blinds. Stacks of documents lay in neat piles on the desk. Claire sat across from Mr. Greenbaum, a local estate attorney with soft manners and clearer vision than most she'd met. "So, to confirm," he said, pen hovering, "you'd like the beach house to transfer to a non-profit women's recovery network after your passing?" "Yes," Claire said without hesitation. "Preferably as a weekend retreat space, somewhere women can breathe again." He nodded. "And the investment funds?" "Split in thirds," Claire replied. 1/3 to fund legal aid for older women in divorce, 1/3 to scholarship grants for girls raised by single mothers, 1/3 into a legacy trust with no heirs. He raised an eyebrow. "No heirs at all." Claire smiled. "Some people inherit genes, others inherit hurt. I'd rather pass on oxygen." Outside the office window, children ran through sprinklers on the green lawn of a neighbouring daycare. Claire watched them, not wistfully, but with steadiness. "When I was 10, she said softly, my mother left my father after years of silence, no support, no lawyer, no job. She folded laundry at a hotel until her hands cracked. She turned back to him. She deserved a fund like this." He was quiet for a moment, then clicked his pen shut. "What would you like to name the scholarship?" Claire thought a beat. "The Claire Anne Resilience Fund." He nodded again. "It'll last a long time." "That's the point," she said. "I earned it quietly. I'll give it loudly." She signed the first document. There was no drum roll, no applause, just ink, on paper, and a woman who no longer needed acknowledgement to feel seen. As she walked out into the early evening light, she passed a young woman on the steps holding an infant and a folder. Claire smiled and held the door open for her. "You go ahead," Claire said. The woman looked surprised. "Thanks. You work here," Claire laughed softly. "Not anymore. But I used to work for people like you. Now I build for them." The young woman gave a curious look but nodded, walking inside. Claire stepped into the light. The public library was quiet except for the low hum of an old ceiling fan and the muffled giggles from the children's section. Claire wandered through the non-fiction aisles with no real destination, only time. She passed by a shelf labelled Resilience and Recovery Stories. Something caught her eye. A little girl, maybe 7, sat cross-legged on the carpet beside her mother. The girl held up a children's biography titled Women Who Stayed Standing. "Mama, I want this one," she said brightly. The mother smiled, tired but kind. "That's a good one, honey. That series came from the same foundation that paid for your school lunches last year." Claire paused. The girl turned the book over in her hands, studying the back cover. "I want to be the strong one someday, like Grandma was." She didn't leave. She stayed and helped. The words hit Claire like a chord played softly, but perfectly, in tune. The little girl didn't know she was echoing anyone, didn't know the woman 3 shelves away had once written those very words in a journal. "If I can't leave strength, I'll leave steadiness." Claire felt her throat tighten. She didn't step forward, didn't introduce herself, didn't need to. Instead, she walked one aisle over, sat quietly at the reading table, and let her eyes close for just a moment. "Claire Anne Resilience Fund," the mother was saying to another woman nearby. "That's what helped us. I'll never forget that name." Claire opened her eyes slowly. A light breeze from the ceiling fan rustled a paper flyer on the table in front of her. Community Voices, How Women Shape the Future. She picked it up, folded it gently, and tucked it into her journal, not to remind herself, to remind someone else later. The bank lobby smelled of air conditioning and quiet tension. Richard stood in line at the customer service window, holding a single envelope. Inside it, a personal check, dated nearly 6 weeks ago, from Claire. She'd mailed it the day after she left. No letter, just the check. Memo line, "For what's left." At the time, he'd scoffed, tossed it in a drawer, thought it was some final jab. But something had nagged at him since. The handwriting, the date, the exact cent value, $14,117.32. Claire didn't do random, so now here he was, finally curious, or maybe desperate enough to know what she meant. "How can I help you, sir?" the teller asked. "Can you verify if this check is valid? And who holds the account?" The teller took the envelope, tapped a few keys. Her eyebrows lifted. Then she looked again, more carefully. "Sir, this check is drawn from a corporate trust account. Offshore linked. Protected class." Richard's heart ticked. "Is it real?" "Very real," she said. "We're required to place a courtesy call for any verification over $10,000. But yes, it clears." He took the check back, slower this time. As he turned, he caught his reflection in the glass doors, older, thinner, eyes tired. At that moment, he remembered a Tuesday 10 years ago. Same bank. Claire had come to deposit her small business earnings. He'd waved her off in the lobby, saying, "Just hand it to the clerk. You don't need to do everything yourself." She had looked at him, just once, and replied, "That's how things go missing, when you stop looking." He hadn't thought of that line in a decade. But now, holding a check from a woman who'd walked away with precision, he finally understood. She hadn't left him empty-handed. She had left him out of her next chapter. Back in his car, he didn't start the engine. He just sat, opened the glove box, slipped the check inside, then closed it slowly. He didn't cry, didn't call Evelyn, didn't do anything, because sometimes the loudest echo is realizing too late that silence wasn't absence, it was intention. Claire stood in the notary's office, envelope in hand. Inside it, the final instructions for the Claire Anne Resilience Trust. The signatures were complete, the assets assigned, the funds secured. All that remained was one line, handwritten in gentle script, folded into a letter attached to the file. Use it where the silence has lasted too long. As she sealed the envelope, the notary looked up. "Would you like to include any personal letters for the beneficiaries?" Claire hesitated, then nodded once. One. That night, back at the beach house, she pulled out a single sheet of thick, cream-coloured paper. She wrote with the same pen she used on her wedding day, but the words weren't for Richard. They were for Evelyn. "You once said you felt like the outsider, like you were always orbiting someone else's life. So here's what I'll give you, a chance to build your own. A portion of the trust will cover your medical premiums for 10 years, quietly, anonymously, no name attached. I won't give you forgiveness, but I'll give you distance with dignity. Use it well, don't look for me. I've already arrived where I was meant to be." She folded it once, gently, and slid it into a separate envelope labelled, simply, "To be released upon my death, E.T. No drama, no confrontation, only clarity." Later, on the shore, Claire walked barefoot along the surf line. The sky was burnished copper, waves whispering her name without claiming her. She didn't think about what Richard was doing. She didn't need to. She wasn't trying to rise above. She had simply risen. A little girl with curls ran past, chasing a kite. Her laughter danced with the wind. Claire smiled. She didn't leave behind a name. She left behind weight.